Okay, picking up where we were. Okay, apologies for that delay. So the items that we believe are currently within the scope of the rail committee or have previously been referred to the rail committee include Caltrain 4 tracks, the passing tracks, Caltrain technical design standards and technical issues, Caltrain construction technologies and other grade separation technologies review, the San Francisco Creek Bridge, and the geotechnical studies that we're proceeding with, and also presentations from outside agencies, both public and private. I have to change them up. And sorry, and to continue on with that, existing elements also include the community engagement and outreach that has been referred to the rail committee. And some of those are items that are also within the AECOM scope. And this slide represents items that have been discussed at this rail committee as additional items that could be delegated to the rail committee, including the review of the selection criteria for any revisions, the advancement of any new east-west bicycle and pedestrian rail crossings or improvements, and also funding related to grade separations. And I'm sorry, so I'll split up the presentation at this point because the next section is going into the guiding principles, and Chair Koo, I believe you wish to separate the two.
Thank you so much. Is there any technical questions from the committee before we go out to the public? Okay, then let's go to the public for questions or comments.
If anyone would like to make a public comment, if you please use the raise your hand feature.
And we have the public here as well.
Okay, great.
Former chair, the XCAP.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. I submitted a lengthy public comment that just included some more technical issues that I wanted to flag for the committee. They include things that I've submitted for last meeting, but then also I went through the XCAP report and kind of tried to pull out all the other technical details that might get lost in the shuffle. I don't know. Oh, okay. Sorry, there seems to be a phone call here. So I won't rehash what's in there, but I just wanted to say that I feel like it's something that I don't know if it's agendized to be able to push forth today, but it really is something that we should try to get a jump on, since Michelle Bouchard of Caltrain said at our last meeting that they're working imminently on it. And so, and I'll just offer that because I'm here live, if you need me to help go through any of the other XCAP things as you discuss this work plan, I'm available for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Also, I'd like to, since Nadia, you were part of the XCAP group, and you worked on a lot of the suggestions or recommendations, I was wondering if you'd like to join us here just in case we have some questions or comments for you. And I'll take it back to the committee. Is there any questions about what the work plan that was brought forward to us, the draft work plan. Go ahead, Mayor.
So first, I think maybe this is just sort of a wording clarification on C, on the attachment B, the table on C, under focus issue, it says seek changes to rail design criteria that add costs and uncertainty. I took it to mean that it wasn't intended that we would seek changes that would add cost and uncertainty, but rather changes to criteria that to the current criteria that add costs.
Yeah, thank you. I realize that you can't see me smiling under my mask.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that's intended to eliminate items that add cost uncertainty to the project.
Good. And then just under the next column, C as well, it refers to design criteria. I saw that in the presentation, it really said these are technical standards, and we may want to use that term more, although I see that even in a motion, that may have been my motion back in November, I used that design term as well. And then on the we had a couple follow-ups that I didn't see mentioned here. One is under the Embarcadero Alma, it says near-term options. So does that include or refer to the bicycle and pedestrian near-term upgrades? Is that what that's talking about, or is there something else there?
So yeah, what that refers to is currently we're going to be reviewing our options to, I want to say, well, we're reviewing the prior CIP project essentially, and we're trying to look and see what things, are possibilities of moving forward in the more near term.
That's what I was referring to.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And there was related to Embarcadero and Alma, not a near term, but I recall part of that whole consideration of closing Churchill and upgrading Embarcadero is how close the Embarcadero is to its end of life and how that might play into that decision making. So I think it's a sub issue, but we may want to make sure that we're keeping that on the agenda, because it really does influence a consideration of whether to go with a Churchill closure if the actual expense of Embarcadero isn't the upgrade need, but a complete rebuild of Embarcadero, and then the cost ends up getting there. Now, on the other hand, if it is near end of life, whether we close Churchill or not, we may have that on the horizon within decades. And I think those were, one other was, and we put off Palo Alto Avenue, but just like the San Francisco Bridge has bearing on us, including bearing on where to eliminate the 4-track alternative in our arguments to Caltrain. The tracks that go from the bridge to the university station are still not straight as a result of a bridge construction that never got straightened out. And so that is just something that we would want to make sure is part of our discussion with Caltrain, because it gets forgotten and it would be a critical issue going forward.
Yeah, just quickly on that note, that is included in our letter to Caltrain regarding the, what are we calling this now? I think you're right that the word design criteria is probably wrong. We want to call it technical standards or something like that is probably more applicable, but we did include that in our letter to Caltrain.
And then lastly, up under the A and the rail committee actions, when we review grade separation criteria, I think we want to make sure that we're reviewing that along with existing other relevant policies. So we have comp plan, we have the 2012 rail corridor plan, we have the current bike and pedestrian plan, not the one we're looking on. Those are three that come to mind. There may be others that would be part of the context that we should look at real grade separation criteria under. That's it for me for the moment.
Thank you, Chair Koo. Let's see. I'll start with that because I've been working trying to get us to look at those criteria for a long time. Do we still have the weighted average calculator that Megan Kahn whipped up for us back in the old days for the selection criteria? Do you recall that?
Yes, I do recall that. I'm not sure.
Well, I'm sure it's
possibly
still
Nadia
still
might have
there.
knowledge of that, but yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
yes, we
let's
do
just
still have it.
great because let's just remember that that's I found that a really helpful tool to help us calculate and reorder, based on whether people cared more about certain things. So I think that's that would be crucial to us making a data-based decision. Thanks for the San Francisco Bridge stuff. Obviously, that's important. So in C, as we talk about the final EIR for high-speed rail, I know in the past that, these documents have been the ones that have helped us identify what are some of the plans, what are some of the impacts, and I know staff is working on it, and it's long, and we'll hear more about it today, correct?
Yeah, well, just noting, it's just a brief update on it.
Okay, well, this is an important thing, and I know in the past that this has been, the official way for us to engage. So glad to see that on there. I want to be sure that I understand D. It says advance the planning and selection. But when I look at receive updates and provide feedback and procurement, does this description in the first column indicate that this committee would work in advance of the bicycle pedestrian transportation plan, or would we work in parallel?
No, I think it just means advancing the project, not in advance of the actual project.
Okay, let's perhaps that could be reworded in a way just to make sure it's clear and future people understand that. All right, and I really appreciate staff in F responding to the members of the public who are interested in the quiet zone. Thanks for handling that so calmly and expeditiously.
Oh, thank you. So I just want to make sure that, in Nadia's letter to us that we just received, yesterday, that we have, the technical issues to present to Caltrain. So we did send a letter, and all these items that is listed here, all 7, was provided as questions to Caltrain. Yeah, I'm just wondering if that's correct. Because these are the technical
yes.
standards, and so
I actually can confirm that all of these 7 items were included in one of our letters to Caltrain.
super. And that was done in May, so we haven't really heard back from them, right?
No, actually, we've just sent the letters. We met with them following our last meeting. We met with Caltrain. Executive director let her know that we were going to be writing letters. We sent the letters after the EIR came out to let them know for the 4 tracking issue that High Speed Rail had determined that they were not going to use passing tracks in Palo Alto.
Okay, so this doesn't need to go on the work plan to council anymore, right? Because, or is it still something that you feel?
I actually think that was already delegated and referred to the rail committee. So I think it is part of your work plan still. Okay. It's really your call if you want to include it in the report to council.
I think that last month the last meeting, there was questions about that. So I was just wanting to confirm that it's not something that we need to have on the work plan anymore. And I think the mayor and council member Cormac has answered most of the questions that I had with regards to the Embarcadero project. for bike safety and so forth, as well as the bridge end of life. On number C, says advocate Caltrain review and revision of design criteria through LPMG. Do you have any report on how that's coming along, or is there need of more specific asks? The
Well,
design criteria is actually the technical standards, correct?
yes, so I think it would be their Caltrain's technical standards and design criteria. It's really both. Yeah, so I don't have an update on that. I think that would be potentially a rule that our LPMG member could make as we've made these requests to Caltrain.
Okay,
So I could.
can you?
So that was one of the things that Caltrain had committed to doing in addition to just looking at the technical standards. It would be a process, and the intention was that the cities on the corridor that are currently grappling with similar issues would meet with Caltrain as a group of the LPMG representative and the staff representative, and they wouldn't have to meet with 8 cities separately, and we'd kind of have a combined work on that. So that would have been part of that's part of what we want to do as a Caltrain ask. I don't know whether that was covered in the letter. Did we receive the letter to Caltrain?
No, I'm sorry. I think the letter is just I think the letter is just going out possibly today because the EIR just came out on Friday for high-speed rail. So it contains information from the EIR that just came out.
Well, then there may be some, if it hasn't gone out, there may be some updates we'd want to include from this meeting. Sorry.
No worries, no worries.
I do want to note that I think that we have already requested that we be included as stakeholders and participants in their study.
There is also the technical groundwater analysis that was approved to be referred to move forward. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, those are within the, and I'm sorry, I'm not sure where that is, but that was contained on the slide of items that were already referred to the rail committee, which are all the different technical studies.
Okay, but the jackbox construction method and also having to invite the Long Island Railroad to discuss the different grades that they have. Was that part of the approval as well?
Yeah, actually, can I ask the clerk if we could put back up slide 3, I believe it is. These are items that we believe are already referred, sorry, slide 2. So that would fall under the geotechnical studies, the second to last bullet, and then the presentations from outside agencies.
Oh, I see.
And the construction technologies review would be, what jackboxing would fit under.
So those are all under presentations from other outside agencies. I just want to make sure because,
those are all items that we believe already exist within the rail committee scope that were already referred or delegated to the rail committee.
Okay, very good then. Then that's about it. That's all I have questions about. Oh, engaging with payback, and that's also already part of the plan, but also the new bike paths, pedestrian and bicycle pathways, existing ones that were projects that did not get done. These are all going to come together as a discussion with them and the school community, right?
Yes, so payback is a significant contributor to the new bicycle and pedestrian transportation plan, if that's what you're referring to. And same thing with the Safe Routes to School, our traffic safety committee, and other groups.
And in this work plan, when we're going to go to council, will you put it in a timeline kind of thing? What are some of the top more prior that we should be prioritizing and looking at it? Then this way we can be sure that we move forward. There's a visualization that we can see how it's going to be moving forward.
Yeah, so I just note that that's our attempt here on the anticipated time frame, which is the third column. Noting that some of these things are, I would say, a little bit in flux because they're outside of the city's control. Things where we're waiting for a response from Caltrain or waiting for a study from Caltrain. Some of them are more within our control, where we have like a contract with our consultant to conduct studies, although even some of those we might be waiting for Caltrain to make a decision before we move forward with.
Okay. Okay, well, that's it. Go ahead.
So I'm comparing slide 2 to the attachment B, and I agree with that. Clearly, this pursuit of the technical standards were referred to the rail committee, but out of the work plan, I think a number of other things. In fact, most of this work plan has already been referred to the rail committee. And so I thought we should go through and compare our understandings and the basis for that. One part is that there are some things that, so the council, I can't remember the exact wording of the motion, but endorsed the XCAP report to some degree. So the question is, out of things that are in the XCAP report, are they within the purview of the rail committee by virtue of that direction? Or do we need to peel them off and get clarification?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Do you have any thoughts on that? I would think those would be within the rail committee's purview. Yeah, I'm not sure if I mean, potentially the remedy, if we think not, is we add something here that includes that. I'm not sure if you have thoughts about that.
Does this have an impact on what council will consider? And
Yeah, it has an impact on what the rail committee would be able to pursue and tee up for what the council would in the future consider. Rail committee is not going to make determinations, but we're on additional things. But
right.
Do we have the authority to pursue those things based upon the council direction?
Right. And is the question being asked because you'd like to do some of that work in advance of the council? Because the council will have an opportunity to look at all of this.
To be unencumbered on pursuing the rail items that the council has already given policy direction on.
Right. I guess I'm just looking, and maybe Philip or Kylie has an idea of when this item, I assume this is this work plan issue is before the committee today, and this will be this committee's last look at this, and then it will go to council. So is it anticipated that with lots of room in August that there would be an really early opportunity in the fall or late summer for this to go to council?
Yeah, well, I think potentially, so that would be our hope, is to get this in front of council in August so that we can have it approved. I think, and Rippon, please jump in if I'm hearing this wrong, but there might be some concern that some of the things that was looked at in the XCAP report might pertain to other committees, which is, or council's purview. But I don't know if, so that's where I don't know if there's a delineation.
Right, and so that's the reason for my line of questioning is, do we really need to get fully to the bottom of that? And I'm not able to do that for you today. So I'd have to look at the XCAP report and unpack it. And I just don't have all of the elements. That was quite long and comprehensive.
Yeah, so the reason we may not have a real issue between now and when it goes to council. When it does go to council, I want to make sure that we delineate new authorizations from the council versus things that are in the work plan that we believe they've already authorized. They'll have an opportunity to disagree if any of them disagree on any of that. But we're not implying that council hadn't taken action on any of these before. But we tried to get the rail committee kicked off in late winter, early spring. We had our first meeting in April. And then we've kind of gone around on the issue of what is the purview of the rail committee that as so far, based on council delegation. And so now we're going to go from March all the way to August of the rail committee not being able to take some actions that they might have wanted to because of this ambiguity, which I think several of us don't think was ambiguous to the extent that it was being presented by staff. I think we've made progress and we're better aligned now than we were in previous meetings. But frankly, it's taking this long to get to this point, and then still going to take till hopefully August at the earliest before this committee can do what it thought it could do, is something I don't want to avoid unnecessarily.
Right. So appreciating the comments on the history. I can't give you a full perspective on the XCAP report and how that relates to your delegated purview today, but I will do that at your next meeting. When is that? Is it after the council meets?
Yeah, so I think that would be, I do want to note that I think most, if not all of the things that are contained in this are really issues that arose or items that were identified through the XCAP process. So I just wonder if maybe there aren't some specific things, and maybe Nadia can help us with that we could potentially pull and add to this that would be helpful in order to do that, rather than just saying this whole plan. Maybe
Yes,
there's
let's
just
turn to the encyclopedia.
there we go. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Nadia.
Thank you. So I appreciate the constraints of what the authorization is and what you don't have. In my public comments, you'll see I have an A through K, which are the things that were pulled out of XCAP's report. I believe the only one that is not simply a technical question, but is actually a policy position is the quiet zones issue. And so you are already working on a potential study with Menlo Park about Palo Alto Avenue. XCAP wrote that work with Caltrain to eliminate horn noise at grade crossings, which are the biggest overall noise reduction. And so that's the only thing that is not, to my knowledge, a decision that council has made as a whole. This committee was enthusiastic about having you guys work with Menlo Park about a quiet zone at Palo Alto Avenue, but the council as a whole has never talked about whether quiet zones for the entire city is something we're willing to pursue. The only other item that has been talked about by this committee and was in XCAP's report was the idea that some of those bike ped crossings should be advanced before building grade separations. And whether or not that needs explicit backing from council, I don't know. Your motion at the last, one of the meetings, and I have the motions in the back of the thing if Molly wants to see them. You specifically, as a council, asked to ensure that certain things are studied in the new bike ped plan, but whether or not those get front loaded, I think is the only issue that hasn't been really delineated. Everything else that was raised by XCAP, council has made a decision on in terms of, we want this separation and we're eliminating these, other separations and what have you. And all the rest is technical questions that should go to Caltrain, if that helps. Molly, I have a printed copy if you want to take a look at that.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Sure.
So it sounds like noise would be the quiet zone, and the noise issue would be the thing to add. Philip, is that not here yet? I'm not seeing it.
Well, actually, and I'm trying to remember, it's on here somewhere. But noting that at this point, and appreciate the note that right now we're working on one quiet zone, and I think that's really going to be our test case, really, and we're going to see how that proceeds and what the study finds, and then potentially once we have the study for Palo Alto, we can take that and apply it to the other crossings as well, and potentially with some modifications because they might need different things. But that's our hope, and I don't even know how much. We'll have to see how that study turns out, I guess. But that's that. I think that also falls within this committee purview already.
The other thing I would add is that there's in trying to talk to LPMG, I think it would be important for this committee to write a letter to LPMG, because that's how the rail committee used to operate before. And that was the most effective way of making sure that we got things frankly, in Caltrain's paper system, because otherwise the comments at LPMG meetings basically disappear into the ether. And so without having letters that get distributed to all the LPMG members. So once the letter for Palo Alto is finalized, then maybe this committee could work on actually sending a formal letter to LPMG to kind of request to kick off. Yeah. And I would, just from a process standpoint, ask that once the letter to Caltrain is sent out, if it could be made public so that everyone knows what was included.
Yeah, certainly. And noting that I think that what you just said actually fits perfectly within that description of the one that we were discussing earlier, the advocate Caltrain review and revision of design criteria through LPMG. And also noting that F is the quiet zones item.
Yeah, follow up on one thing. So when we were looking at particularly vertical curve, but there are maybe to some extent the vertical grade, the impact of freight has always been a consideration. And I think, Philip, you might have been on the discussion that with MTC staff that Senator Becker was on. And so one of the issues that I explained this issue to them and how much it affects grade separation costs throughout the corridor, which they are now starting to really look at, like Caltrain, of, okay, how do we fund this whole thing? How do we get it accomplished as a whole? And a lot of what we talked about was, okay, this very concept, if we get together, upgrade technical standards, how much do we remove in cost for everybody? Not everybody's going to take advantage of each of those, but as that set of new standards. But one is that they can't dictate to UP, and UP is tough to bargain with. But they're kind of transactional. They're about dollars. And so the point I made to them was that if there was an analysis to look at the cumulative cost reduction benefit of reducing freight speed, then if say that was $500 million on the corridor, then some fraction of that could be potentially offered in negotiation to UP. Whereas if any individual city tried to do it, it wouldn't have that bargaining power. But there are two other aspects to this that I think we need to dive into that may give us additional leverage. One is the current vertical curve standard is based upon the permissible freight speed of both loaded and unloaded freight cars. But the physics of it are that it is the loaded freight cars that cause needing a greater curvature because they're heavier than either passenger cars or unloaded freight cars. And I'm not at all sure that UP operates loaded freight cars at the freight limit. They may operate the unloaded freight cars. So we may not need to have a change in the practice. We may just need to align the standard with the practice, which is an easier barrier. We're not asking them to necessarily go slower. The second update is that a leading rail expert just recently brought to my attention that, and I've shared this with Molly already, that there are cities that regulate rail speed in their city boundaries, and including, and I thought maybe it was only out of state and there'd be some California prohibition, but one was a Central Valley city that I think rail goes through. And so the question would be not whether we would want to limit passenger rail speed, but perhaps freight rail speed, and we might have local discretion to do that. And so we could peel off our grades that way. And so this is something to just research more. It's preliminary, but it was an interesting wrinkle that I hadn't thought of. And so that's just two little aspects there. And then I did want to add one other thing on, you alluded to on I think you said in our letter, we made the point that high-speed rail doesn't need 4 tracks per their EIR. That's technically true, but the problem is, as I understand it anyway, is that high-speed rail's presence on the corridor means that Caltrain would have to have the 4 tracks to not have an undermining of their service model. So high-speed rail said, we didn't stipulate 4 tracks. We just made it so you can't operate your trains at the capacity you intend to and at the speed you intend to unless you have 4 tracks.
Yeah, well, actually, yes, you're correct. But what it is high-speed rail is not going to require passing tracks.
I understand
within
that
segment. Caltrain might actually require them. So that's really why that.
Require them because of the presence of high-speed rail on the corridor, not independent. If there was not going to be a high-speed rail and they had their max build-out plan, they do not need 4 tracks. They only need 4 tracks if they have to share the corridor with high-speed rail and they go to their max build-out.
Oh, go ahead.
And I'm sorry, Allison too.
Oh, I'm sorry. Allison first.
No,
please.
no worries. I feel like our conversation has morphed from the work plan, and I'm not quite sure what we're supposed to be doing at this moment. So just wanted to say that if we're talking about 4 tracks, I think that's later with the updates, right, of the high-speed rail and things like that. And I guess my other question is, I'm not clear what the things are that you are saying you want this committee to do that aren't captured in the work plan. It'd be helpful for me to understand that. There've been a lot of allusions and I'm just not clear on what it is you think we're not allowed to do.
So one is to have greater refinement on the aspect of these technical standards and that are part of the work plan, which is to pursue upgrades to those.
So is that accomplished by just changing the wording in C?
Well, it goes in, what I was just speaking to is a sub issue of that, but an important one.
I understand, but I'm reading the staff report, which says we're not supposed to be discussing the topics. We're supposed to be discussing the work plan.
But it's a scope of that work
So
plan.
perhaps if I might suggest then, if that's an important item of it, then under C, the second column, perhaps there's a 3rd bullet that the committee recommends adding for additional detail to articulate that piece.
Well, we already have a bunch of those in the PowerPoint. They're just not on this table. And what I want to make sure is, to the degree that we are attempting to list them, that it's complete.
If I may, another way that is what you guys did previously when we were in this boat before, which is we'd like to pursue something generally with high-speed rail and Caltrain, but we don't know exactly what it is and we want enough leeway, is that it wasn't necessarily in the work plan, it was in the guiding principles. And so you actually already have guiding principle number 9 says Palo Alto seeks modernization of freight operations in the corridor and will seek flexibility from Union Pacific to pursue desired improvements in the Caltrain corridor. So it was broad enough to say you can go have a conversation about freight speeds if that's going to be beneficial to us, but it wasn't necessarily nailed down as a tasked item in a work plan that has to have a due date and who's doing it and that sort of thing. So you might think about really using the guiding principles for that stuff that's murky.
Thank
I knew
you.
there was a reason we had them combined as one item.
And I knew there's a good reason for Nadia to be here too.
I'm sorry, where are they again?
It's on a-
staff report.
Right, but they've been separated, so we haven't reviewed them yet.
Yeah,
it's
so
on packet page 6.
apologies. We'll go through that. I have it on slides. We can go
Yeah.
through or not. I just thought it would be easy if we wanted to edit.
But let's finish up on the work plan so that we can move on to the next. So if there's anything that we feel that we need to add on to, as Kylie had suggested, adding bullet points to any of those columns under a different focus issues, then we should bring it up right now.
And might I just add, Chair Koo, I would also encourage the committee, if there are items in the XCAP report that you feel are not addressed in this work plan, adding those specific items, as Nadia just noted, in terms of the noise was one of them, which I think is covered under F, but if that's not sufficient for what the committee is desiring, I recommend the committee include any of those updates that you feel are in the XCAP report to this work plan. It'll just provide some clarity for council when this comes before them, that they know, all right, here's the work plan, this is what we're approving, and they don't have to cross-reference.
Thank you. Yes, actually, I was going to go back to number F. We are doing the Palo Alto Avenue Quiet Zone first, but I think that part of this is to add another bullet, is to say that it'd be based on this pilot, then we're going to also examine all the other.
So I think that's what we
Process.
intended with explore establishment of quiet zones at Palo Alto Avenue and elsewhere as applicable.
Okay, and elsewhere. Okay.
Happy to revise that if you think other language would be more appropriate.
It didn't jump out, but yeah, thank you. Elsewhere is sufficient. So that addresses the XCAP report recommendations A through K, with K answered. Do we need to give further direction in regards to the Caltrain letter that is being sent to Caltrain, that it should also be sent to LPMG?
So if I can, I think the recommendation from Nadia was for rail committee to actually send a letter to
Oh, rail
LPMG, as opposed to the letters that we're sending to the executive director. So that LPMG and noting that a lot of these issues that we're identifying will probably be helpful for other LPMG members and
Absolutely.
agencies. So that I think that's can serve a dual purpose there of potentially helping other agencies as well.
So do you think, I'm sorry, it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think it's we in that letter to LPMG, we should attach the letter to Caltrain staff, or just do a rewrite that's very similar, and we can do it either way?
Yeah, I think either way is fine.
Okay.
Oh, one more question. When you have monitor and engage, for example, in focus issue number A, under letter A, the third bullet in the middle column, monitor and engage with Caltrain on the bridge, San Francisco Bridge. It also means that a report is brought back to the rail committee for us to discuss and to learn more about what they're doing, correct? I just don't want it to be one-sided.
Yeah, that's correct. So similar to other items that we're working on, we have a meeting coming up with Caltrain staff on this, and we would plan to inform the rail committee on everything that we learned from that meeting.
Okay, thank you. If that's, oh, would you like to?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, so it seems like you're identifying that you would want to add a bullet that specifically calls out the letter to LPMG. And I would just say that it's really a different type of letter, because your job at LPMG is to talk to other cities about why these standards matter to them. And we could weave in there some examples of, for example, if you have a thinner bridge deck in Burlingame, the road doesn't have to dig down as deep. That would shorten their amount of excavation and whatnot, and could save them a lot of money. And I would like to announce separately that with my role of Friends of Caltrain, I am working with Adina and other technical folks on trying to come together with some kind of presentation that we are hoping to give to electeds, particularly in San Mateo County, where they're also doing these grade separations, to kind of make everybody aware of that fact that these issues are really impacting their costs, because they really want to get those grade separations funded. And we think we can value engineer a way for them to cut costs. And so I'm hoping that those cities are actually going to be the tip of the spear on this issue. And so in some ways, it's okay that we end up coming up with this in August. It's not great, but it might have to happen. But we're trying to front load those issues separately. But my recommendation would be to try to put in a bullet that specifically calls out that letter with a different focus, so that it's clear to council what's happening.
Just noting that we do have a bullet there that says that a planned rail activity under C, the first one is to advocate LPMG. So I would think that would be adequate for covering that.
And I hadn't thought about the difference when you're writing to Caltrain staff, they already understand the ramifications of these things, whereas the letter to LPMG may be more educational. So now I realize they're probably the one to LPMG is probably the longer one.
Okay. So if there isn't, Councilmember Cormac, anything else?
No, I don't, do we need to make any amendments to this?
Um,
If I can just suggest what I heard is one thing that we want to note is the design criteria. We should add technical standards. I think we want
In
design.
C,
I think
C
we probably
focus,
want
yeah.
design criteria there as well, but I think we'd say design criteria / technical standards.
mhm.
That's the one thing that I did hear that we should clarify.
And then we should change it instead of that add to in order to reduce. Right?
Yes. We will clarify the language there to be
Okay.
And
in order to reduce cost uncertainty. There we go.
And then there was a clarification on D as to what
Yes,
was meant
advance.
by advance.
Yep.
And then just incorporating within the Embarcadero, not just the near-term options, but the end of life considerations, I guess is the way it is. And then up above under reviewing the selection criteria, it was also to incorporate in that review other relevant existing policies.
If I could just flag that one for you guys, that's one where I expect the council might have lots of opinions, and that might be a weighted one or a heavy one, because what it involves is looking at the comprehensive plan, looking at your rail corridor 2012 plan, and looking at your bike ped plan, and looking at, frankly, a very disparate set of goals and trying to come together with what's most important. So just to give you an example, folks are interested in a trench. Trench means excavating large distances, but you have things in the comp plan that talk about, you know, the limitations on basements, a general, you know, goal of not trying to dig up as much as we need to, repairing riparian habitats, what have you. So that's going to be a point of contention. And frankly, something that we really struggled with when we were looking at Megan Kahn's weighted thing is we couldn't really balance, well, we have all these different goals and that's a problem. So I just want to say that I expect that when that part goes to council, that might take a bit.
Well, thank you.
I'm sorry, and that just makes me think even with the SCAP, there will be considerations that we should be viewing. You know, concrete is 7% globally of all greenhouse gas emissions, and we certainly have some alternatives that are be the biggest concrete project we've had in this city maybe ever, and other ways that it may be less. The difference between an earthen hybrid versus either a trench or a concrete elevated. So just another one of those existing sets of policies that we'll need to try to figure out how to reconcile with this.
With that, if there's no more, do we need to make a motion to recommend? So
Yes, I think that'd be best if you do make a
Okay.
motion.
And you've captured all the notes in terms of edits and what.
For
little
Yes.
things-
clarity's sake, I would recommend the committee at least high level identify the edit or topic areas of edits in your motion. Just for clarity of communication, both for the public as well as the council. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I think Mayor Burt just went through a nice list. So if we could just regurgitate that as part of the motion, that would provide the hopefully helpful clarity for all.
They
No,
wanted to
let me
be
restate it.
All right. Shall I take a first pass and then everyone
I'd
can?
appreciate
Okay,
that.
great.
Thank you,
All right, so I'll
Councilmember.
move that we accept the Rail Committee 2022-23 work plan with the following revisions. A, include the comprehensive plan, the bike pedestrian master plan, and the 2012 rail plan, and the SCAP plan in the review of the grade separation selection criteria. Okay, and that let's have the little letter A at the beginning of this bullet. Thank you so much, because that will identify the focus area. Yeah, great. And then the next item would be C. Sorry, this isn't going to go in your order. I'm trying to tie them to the focus issues. Great.
So she's using these, that capitalized.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how to
Oh,
capture that.
so
Perhaps if I could suggest just next to little a, say focus area A colon
Sure,
blank.
there you go.
And then little b, focus area C colon blank.
Perfect.
Just keep it simple.
All right, so then little b would be focus area C. This is like the attachment C1 that was attachment D last week or whatever that was. Okay, great. So modify the language to, I'm on your B. Modify the language to add technical standards and change quote that add unquote to quote in order to unquote. Great. C would be focus area D. I don't know that we had language here, so why don't we just staff to revise language to indicate that the rail committee work will be in parallel with that of the new bicycle and pedestrian transportation plan. Thank you. And then small letter D will be focus area E. And that would be in the time frame, include end of life for Embarcadero Alma project. And I'll stop there, and whatever I've missed, in the event there's a second, my colleagues can add.
I just had a question for clarification. You have, Allison, include the comprehensive plan, the bike plan, in the review of grade separation criteria. I'm not sure you mean to include all of the entire plans. Did you mean review them or?
Include
Study? I don't
them
know what the word
when we review.
Okay.
I think that was the intent. Yeah. So just in little letter A before the word review. It,
it's within our review.
okay.
The clarity that we're including them in the plan. That's all.
Or
correct.
consider, maybe instead of include.
Excellent.
I just
Well
wanna-
done. Let's change the word include to consider.
If we can, it's the bicycle and pedestrian transportation plan, not master.
Excellent. Transportation. God forbid we have consistent language across the city. It's the Parks Master Plan. Okay. All right. And if I've missed something, my colleagues will help out. Oh, sorry, one thing, under B, little letter B at the end, in order to reduce. We just need to add the word reduce. Just to be clear what we're trying to do with costs and uncertainty. All right,
So we're as a committee accepting this, but what we're really doing is recommending.
and that's the top part of the motion.
Okay.
Clerk already helpfully helped us. Apologies for being redundant.
Okay, well, I don't know if we need that bullet instead of saying recommend to the city council with the following revisions. And then the other thing that I would like to see added to the plan, at least as it goes to the council, not the final plan, is a notation on for the council's clarity on which things and where they had previously taken action. Which things to the work plan.
Okay, and does staff need that additional clarity in this motion?
I'm sorry, I don't think we need that in the motion.
Okay.
I'm okay as long as it's just included in the staff report or in the matrix.
And we can move forward for a vote, please, Madam Clerk.
Councilmember Cormac,
Yes.
Mayor Burt,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ku.
Yes,
Motion carries unanimously.
thank you. So we'll move on to the next, which is the guiding principles.
So we have the guiding principles captured in a PowerPoint that at least might be helpful for members of the public to see. And I thought actually if we wanted to wordsmith it all, it might be a good way for us to go about it here as well.
Yes, yes, please go ahead.
Unless anybody wants me to read this, I won't read it. But this is the preamble. The next slide goes into the actual principles, purpose. And then we have to sing this later. And then these are the actual guiding principles. So happy to go whichever direction members of the rail committee would like to look at this.
Do we have any comments from the public?
If you'd like to make a public comment on this item, please raise your hand now. Chair Ku, there are no requests to speak.
Very good. Come back to the committee.
So I don't recall when we were the committee of the whole that we even looked at these. Did we? I don't have any memory of that. I think, we just, so this is my first time working with them, and is the point here for us to recommend any changes to council? That's a lot of process. Okay. So first of all, we would have to fix the part of the purpose, right? I think actually this whole thing should be rewritten. It's almost like a little bit of history here would be helpful. Like, was Rail Committee first established for high-speed rail, and then it lapsed, and then back in 2015, and then it lapsed again, and then back as the committee of the whole, and then it lapsed, and now back. Okay. That actually might be helpful, just helpful context in the purpose. And then I'll just say what I like about this. I guess one thing we should think about is, I don't know how carefully, one really maps with the criteria that we established for train crossings. I don't know if that's important. 2 is important. 3 is certainly important. These are strong statements of our partnership with Caltrain. I don't know what we want to do about 5, if we want to adjust that so that there's a, more concrete description of what we think should happen. And that's related to 6. And then on the other side, I think we're advocating strenuously. That's going well. Modernization of freight. There's already been a little bit of discussion of that. I was actually struck by 10, and I feel like 10 is where, we need to do a little bit more work, especially if, as I saw somewhere, I believe it might have been in Ms. Nayek's commentary, that if we believe that 4 tracks are better located outside of our city, it seems incumbent upon us to work collaboratively with our neighbors. Good start, but I can tell that it was written at a different time. So I don't know how helpful it will be to wordsmith here entirely, or if we want to perhaps perhaps the chair would want to delegate an ad hoc to work with staff and, bring this into the modern time.
That sounds like a good idea.
Okay.
Yes, please.
So a couple things. So 5 says if high-speed rail proceeds, that we should seek funding for affected cities to analyze potential impacts. And then 6 says that high-speed rail should fund grade separations and shouldn't commence service until they're complete. So first, it seems like 5 and 6 should somehow be combined. And that we wouldn't be seeking funding just to analyze, we'd be seeking funding to design and construct. Although 6 says that high-speed rail should pay for all of it, whereas 7 lists other funding sources. So those statements seem to need to be reconciled. And what's has evolved is since these were created, Caltrain came out with their long-range business plan, which means that we really need grade separations regardless of high-speed rail. Whereas at the time this was written, it was pretty much only system-wide, we only need them if high-speed rail came.
I think that's really important context for the timing when these guiding principles were established.
Right.
Is that was the primary concern at the time, and it's really evident when you look at the guiding principles. And since then, as you mentioned, the 2040 Caltrain business plan service vision has come out, which really has changed that.
And then where in 7, where we actually list funding sources, say Caltrain, high-speed rail, and Santa Clara County. And I think what was really meant there was VTA. I don't think there were prospective county dollars other than that. And now state and federal dollars are looking like they're the biggest and most likely additional buckets, although, we didn't have MTC down, as the mega measure. So whether we want to list all those agencies or describe kind of the categories of them, I think that one of the things that's evolved in the thinking is that the ones we didn't list are the highest candidates today, but they weren't at that time. So either to delineate them more, but as guiding principles, I favor kind of a categorical of, regional, state, and federal probably captures it. Then on 10, this is where it I think largely dovetails, not exclusively, because quiet zones and maybe passing tracks are a little carved out from that, but the joint effort through LPMG or otherwise to work with Caltrain on technical standards is, I think, now what we're looking at as the primary focus of 10. And so we may want to rewrite it to reflect that evolution. So the ones that come to mind.
Can I just pop in one more time? I guess the other thing we should do is also think about what's missing. Is there anything missing from here that we would want to add, sort of up level for just a moment and not look at what was given to us? I see Ms. Naik jumping up and down. I wonder if the chair would permit her to add something.
Of course. Thank you. As the one with really unnecessary institutional knowledge on this issue, I would just remind everybody that even though this is everyone's least favorite thing to do live at a council meeting, you kind of need this to be able to move forward so that you guys have your mission. And so the earliest that this could get approved by council is really what we need, because this gives you your blessing as a committee to do the work that you need to do. To Allison's concerns before, the guiding principles don't really have to jive with the criteria, because it's really the guiding principles allow you guys as a committee to operate, and you're not agreeing to what the criteria needs to be, because you're going to do that in a different part of it procedurally. I would agree that the purpose definitely should be upgraded. I just took out that last sentence that talks about high-speed rail and whatever and changed 2015 to 2022. That was my quick fix, but I like Councilor McCormack's idea of putting in the whole history for someone who's reading this for the first time and doesn't understand that this came out of nowhere. I think the things that are missing from this is Palo Alto continuing to say that Caltrain needs to be the lead agency on the corridor related to high-speed rail. That's number 6. And that the study and construction of any potential passing tracks, and if needed, I put grade separations or modifications to grade separations, because there is a weird scenario here where we build a grade separation in the future and then high speed rail comes along and decides they want to change something, well, that's fabulous, but then they'd have to pay for it. I mean, it's not really fabulous, but then they have to pay for it. And then I also added in my kind of notes here is putting in stuff that Palo Alto will actively participate in any opportunities to improve the planning, design, and eventual construction of grade separations, including actively engaging with Caltrain's corridor-wide grade separation study and in a technical design and operating standard studies. And I left it broad because there's a chance down the road that the 3 counties get together and decide to do something, or you want to go speak in front of Sacramento and go argue for stuff. So I added a bullet as well that said that Palo Alto will advocate at all levels of government, federal, state, and local for reviewing and updating any design and operating standards that improve grade separation alternatives for the Caltrain corridor. And so again, trying to give this committee leeway so that as opportunities present themselves with Senator Becker or other folks, so that you could go up and participate in that meeting because they tend to come quickly and you only get 2 minutes, but that you guys would be covered procedurally for being able to argue for changes. I made my own
She made
notes.
up her own
I'm
notes,
happy
yeah.
to share it with the clerk if you want to see what they are. I wasn't sure we were going to get to this part in the meeting because I thought the work plan was going to go longer, so I didn't send them to you. But I'm happy to share them.
You know, if the chair would permit a suggestion,
Yes.
you know, I don't think there's a lot of dispute amongst the 3 of us. So perhaps you could select one of us to work with staff and take Ms. Nayak's input and just deal. I'm happy to delegate that rather than work through them all. But I mean, if we're going to work through them all, it's going to take some time. I'm perfectly happy to do that work, but I'm also perfectly willing to delegate it to, any of the 3 of us, if staff's comfortable with that approach.
Is that something
Yeah,
that?
just noting with that approach, then we could also combine this item to council on the same date as a potential consent item.
Right, which was addressing the point Ms. Nayak
Yes.
raised earlier about timing.
Okay. Thank you for your suggestion, Councilmember. Yes.
So I'm good with that as well. And part of that process, I was starting to try and do in my own head is comparing attachment B. And is there anything in here that wouldn't be authorized under the guiding principles or that would need a little more clarity? And so I think that would simply be part of that offline check. One that came to mind, for instance, I was looking at, okay, we're supposed to, where was it? Oh, engage Palo Alto community and rail planning activities. And I don't think that's there. Under 10, we've got neighboring communities, but we maybe it's as simple as and stakeholders we add or something like that. But under the guiding principles, it doesn't look, unless I'm missing it, like
Quiet
there's,
zones.
yeah, like there's a
Oh, no, I mean in the guiding principles, we don't have anything about quiet
oh,
zones.
no, they say number 1 has.
It's on the
Oh,
first
did I
one.
miss it?
But what I was saying was that I don't see where it talks about a guiding principle that we're going to engage with our own stakeholders, PAUSD, Stanford, et cetera.
I think that was
Oh, eight, I
probably
think so,
captured in
yes.
8.
Look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so 8's the one that speaks to context sensitive
Yeah, again,
solution.
yeah, I
I'm
think it's
sorry.
real opportunity for,
Okay.
I mean, if we were
Yeah.
making minor changes, I would certainly be happy to work through this, but I think this needs a major rewrite.
But if we don't go through the CSS process going forward, I mean, we had this issue of trying to look at doing that when we kicked this off and it didn't happen. I want to make sure that there's still an engagement. So maybe we leave 8 as is, but add stakeholders to 10, even though if we had done 8, we'd or we're still doing 8, then it would be fully covered. But we don't have even an X cap right now. So what's our process going forward on engagement? The argument would be this is over and done with, so there is no more engagement, but we all want that engagement going forward.
Well, just noting that, as a project progresses, there's going to need to be continued engagement throughout. It's going to go into potentially the next phase would be an environmental phase of the project that would be engagement in that.
Your mic.
This is the rail committee charter. So the question is, does the rail committee have within its charter, guidance on engagement in addition to what the city will do.
So I just have a question. So with number 8, going, using supports the use of context sensitive solutions, how close are we in using that CSS process?
Well, I think I'd speak to this with a little bit of coming into late in this process, but noting that I think that's what the city considered a lot of its outreach process throughout this this thing. So the town halls, the XCAP group, amongst other outreach. I think it would consider that the context sensitive solution has been done throughout this process.
And will continue.
Yes, and would continue.
So I would say outreach and all those things were done, but we didn't use the CSS process per se. There was some argument at a certain point in time that we used it because we used it in name, and then that was abandoned. So no, it's a prescribed process, and that was discussed and then chosen not to do. So we do need to reconcile that. Yeah, there's outreach, and there's CSS process because it's a very deliberate problem-solving process for major transportation projects.
For historical reference, this was in there because at the time that Rail Committee was originally established, it was when we were trying to push Caltrain and High Speed Rail to use CSS. This was the Bruce Fukuji, that Peninsula Rail program. I'm having nightmares. And then later it was because we were still trying to push for that for High Speed Rail to do. And then it also morphed into when Palo Alto was trying to work on that process. So it's kind of been, I mean, the reason it's not just that this is a guiding principle for the Rail Committee, this had to go to council, they bought in, and then it was solidified. So it has been the law of the land, if you will. And I have to go back and look, but I'm pretty sure that's also in the comprehensive plan. But I'd have to double check. I think CSS made it in there with regards to this, but I don't recall off the top of my head. So.
Our encyclopedia.
Well, and just so everybody knows, I'll try and be brief on that history, that we successfully got High Speed Rail to agree to the CSS process for the Peninsula corridors, the only part of their state that they had done it, and was going to be the first time that had been moved from highway projects to what was a rail project, because we hadn't had any major rail projects in the US for a long, long time. And then when the blended system came in, it all went into hibernation. When High Speed Rail came back in 2015, said we're moving forward with the EIR, we're going to begin construction within 2 years on this or so at the time. And the EIR we're going to have complete within a year. This is the EIR that just got completed 7 years later. They insisted that they couldn't do the CSS because there wouldn't be time. So that's why there was a battle, and we didn't prevail on that next one. And then as Nadia said, it came up one more time when we were looking on how to proceed on our own internal process. We had advocated and for CSS use to be done by High Speed Rail and Caltrain. And then there was a question of, once we were doing our own projects, wouldn't we use it ourselves? And then there was a decision to not use it. It made in 2017 because the argument at that time was we needed to have all these decisions made within a year and a half. And this is always the, thinking that you can shortcut a process and have a better outcome. And that was part of the argument at the time. And also the, unrealism on how long these things take to get right.
Okay, I think it's the committee's consensus that an ad hoc work with staff and also with Nadia to come up with the guiding principles and also the preamble, revisit the preamble as well as the purpose of the committee to bring it to more of current times. And Is that a motion, or do you need a motion for that, or?
We do. And I've just been trying to type up something on the side. I might recommend the committee consider something like a motion that says, recommend the city council adopt the guiding principles for the rail committee, or approve, I guess, as amended per the guidance below and in cooperation with a delegated member of the committee or something to that extent. Does that sound roughly in line with what you're thinking, Chair and committee members? I can send this to the clerk if that's roughly what you're thinking. I am it to you.
I think based on what you said, it sounded like
You're
what we
like, "I
said.
Okay, so she'll put that up on the screen. And then the only other piece is I tried to take a stab at a couple bullets of areas that the committee identified specifically for adjustments. There are holes, so hopefully committee members, you can clarify once the clerk is able to put that up on the screen.
That guiding principle is the guy who heads the school or the woman who heads the school. That update for,
Yeah.
is that another bullet?
Yeah, update 4 should be another bullet. And I believe this, I was trying to refer to what the committee was trying to update item 10 for. So if you could perhaps, in your words, identify the evolution that you were.
I'd just say, oh, well, there was 7. We have that? Yeah. And then a 10 needs to add sure stakeholder engagement in the context of the 10.
Just a quick question. Do we want to limit the different potential funding agencies or partners to the regional, state, federal, the typical list? There might be opportunities for, and I'm not sure.
Including
might
but not
happen.
limited to.
Yeah. I think that's
So-
probably what we want to do is
Yeah.
something like that. And
So
I'm sorry, I don't mean to
one
wordsmith here,
example
but
is Stanford.
yes,
And
exactly.
They're not, they're a quasi municipality.
Okay, so for the clerk, at the end of the second to last bullet, item 7, I would put a comma. Including but not limited to regional, state, and federal. Right, and we don't have to be perfect. We know this is just enough, so we capture things. Sorry, where are we on 10?
Yeah, so item 10 was Palo Alto will work cooperatively with neighboring communities with respect to HSR and Caltrain issues of mutual concern, including grade separation. And that was one area that the committee kind of universally agreed wanted to be updated based on the evolution of, are there a few words we can add in there at a high level to describe what you would like that item updated?
Yeah, Mayor Burt, you had one. I'm blanking on what it was. You had something when you spoke to 10 that you felt needed to be added.
I remember it to be more about, in number 10, it says neighboring communities, but it didn't include the local stakeholders.
It was really.
I
about
think
L-
this was where the committees and the, yeah,
LPMG. It was about LPMG.
okay. Update item 10 to include work with LPMG and any potential technical committees.
Yeah, although I don't know that we may we want to keep it as generic as possible in the guiding principle, so we'll struggle to attempt that.
And the missing blank was participate in regional activities with any opportunities to improve the planning, design, and eventual construction of grade separations. And I didn't see if it's captured, but the other one was about,
Eventual construction
yeah.
to the clerk. And let's have and or before that. After design, let's have and or. Thank you. It's like magic. I say things and they show up.
I know. It's like some.
And then I think the other one was that Palo Alto will advocate at all levels of government for reviewing. Sorry, that was fast. Will advocate at all levels of government for reviewing and updating any design and operating standards that improve grade separation alternatives for the Caltrain corridor. Because I don't want to limit you to things that are just about Palo Alto's grade separations. You want to actually improve the whole corridor. Because if we can cut everybody's bills, we help our own.
Nadia, she,
Oh, yeah, sorry. Let me just show it to you.
so I'm looking at bullet number 3. Is that just repeating? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The 7th bullet again? That's the same thing, right?
No, 7 bullet here.
Yeah, so bullet number 3 says add and ensure stakeholder and community engagement. Then we go down to bullet number, yeah. I think it's bullet 6 now, update
Yeah, so-
funding. No, ensure stakeholder community engagement in items 8 and 10.
Yeah, so should we drop number 3? Yeah, the 7th bullet, or 6, you say 6, ensures stakeholder engagement.
I'm sorry, so Leslie just took it out. Yeah, there you go. Then we don't have a duplicate. Okay,
I'm happy to make this motion and then, yeah.
okie dokie. Take the vote.
Councilmember Cormac,
Yes.
Mayor Burt,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ku,
Yes,
motion carries unanimously.
awesome.
And then just for one clarifying point for the committee, since both of these motions were passed unanimously, with that delegation of this, staff would expect to bring this back on consent unless you believe something otherwise and want a full discussion with council. Well, both the approval of the work plan as well as the approval of the guiding principles.
I think council's going to want to discuss.
I was gonna say the same thing.
The alternative could be we put it on consent and just note if council wants to pull
Yeah,
it.
but we have that prerogative in agenda
course.
setting by the mayor and the city manager, and we may have guidance that if we think it's an issue that would warrant that discussion. So I think rather than seeking it pulled.
So is it the preference of the committee this go on action then?
I just have a question about the quiet zones. You didn't actually specify in the guiding principles that you would like to pursue, actively pursue. You have something about
It's about
noise, but it does not really call out what we were talking about, that the work of some of this committee might be in thinking about quiet zones for the entire city. And I don't know if you want to call
So
it
just
out.
a reminder, the guiding principles are going to inform and help corral the work in the work plan. So as long as the work plan identifies what you're identifying, Nadia, in terms of, that extra detail, I think the guiding principle doesn't have to have the same level of detail that the work
Mhm.
plan has.
I think that's sufficient, right? Keep it broader, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
At least those are the guiding principles will help guide the decisions this committee makes. The work plan will be the actual to-do list.
I was just going to note, and I might be incorrect on this, but that having an action item might place us a little bit further out than a consent item on the calendar.
I mean, from my perspective, I think these are pretty uncontroversial. It's just a detail level. It's kind of, here's the detail of what the work we're going to do, and here's an update on the principles.
Yeah, I don't think.
So I'd be comfortable with it being on consent. Certainly when we get to recommendations we're making that are components of the work plan, I would imagine that those would want to be action items.
Well, if we did it on consent, then that would allow us to probably put it on the very first meeting.
Yes.
That could
Assuming
sway.
whoever the chair delegates this to
That
gets
could
going.
sway. And I appreciate that you brought it up. Yeah, I think I'm okay with it going on to consent. Yes? Okay, so finish with this item. All right, let's move on to the verbal update on interagency activities. If there's any.
Yeah, thank you. So noting we don't have anyone from Caltrain or VTA here with us today, but actually I'm going to turn it over to Ripon to do the staff updates, and I'll chime in if necessary because I actually thought I would need to leave, but we're running ahead of the schedule that I predicted today. So I will have to leave in about 20 minutes, but I'll still be here. But Ripon's going to do our staff updates.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. Ripon Bhatia. Thank you. As Philip mentioned, Caltrans and VTA will not be able to make it, but we would give a brief updates on the happenings that the staff has been conversing with both those agencies. To start with VTA, we did meet with VTA regarding the project funding, and as we previously stated that they will be willing to accept the additional studies into the grade separation program. So we will be working with them on the agreement with the PA for with the city of Palo Alto for these additional studies into the incorporating into the agreement and bringing back the agreement for our review. Also, we all had a conversation. We have scheduled a conversation with them for the grade separation funding for the ped bike crossings that we are looking at. So we have that meeting scheduled later today, actually, and we can bring up the update at the next meeting. With Caltrans also, we have been constantly working with them to like Philip mentioned in our previous reports that we met with them in regards to discussion on the forward tracking as well as the standards technical criteria that we are looking at for them to review. So we are following up with the letter hopefully today, and we can incorporate any of those changes that are coming from this meeting to if feasible, if that letter hasn't gone out yet. So also we have a meeting scheduled with them later this week regarding San Francisco Bridge. They will be sharing their analysis on the bridge report, and we will bring that back with that. And if there are any next steps that are already lined up with them, so we'll follow up with them and bring back the updated report to this committee. Also, California High Speed Rail released their final EIR on June 10th, and it's open, and the board is considering the adoption and approval on August 17th and 18th meeting. Just to note that they will accept the public testimony only on this first day, which is August 17th, and they will be doing the deliberation on the 18th. And therefore, if we were to provide any comments, we can send them sooner in writing or bring it at this meeting. This meeting will be held in hybrid mode. So, we could attend, and we don't have to attend it in person. And they're trying to bring that meeting in San Francisco so as to have it more closer to all those communities. Quiet zones. Staff is working with the Menlo Park in finalizing the consultant contract. We are hoping that Menlo Park may be ready to go to the council like in mid-July. So as part of that, we'll include the Palo Alto Avenue, and we are hoping that would be for the current numbers, it's looking that we would be able to do that within the OOT's budget, and no additional appropriations would be needed. So finally, we are trying to kick off our consultant AECOM for additional studies that we have been authorized. As part of that, we will be initially starting with the outreach and reaching out to the different stakeholders as identified in the scope. And we'll start working on meeting with them to get their review and feedback and incorporate those comments and the refinements in the next steps. So that concludes our staff report, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ripon. So you mentioned AECOM is going to be doing stakeholder engagements. These are like the bicycle, pedestrian people, and Stanford and
the three major
schools.
ones are Payback, Stanford, and PAUSD. In addition, staff will be coordinating with them and other stakeholders like the original designers. So we will be reaching out to them also to seek their feedback.
Okay.
And as part of that, when we bring it to the rail committee, that will also be another opportunity for public to communicate and provide their feedback and comments.
And is part of the engagement there also with some of the neighboring cities? Or is that staff?
Staff has been communicating with the neighboring cities separately, but it's not as part of this effort.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I would just say there's several different touch points for that communication between cities.
Okay. Mayor.
So a couple things. With the discussion with VTA on whether we could use Measure B dollars for bike and ped only crossings that are related to vehicular crossing reconstruction. First, I'd really want to make sure that we're drawing the parallel to what they've already approved for Castro in Mountain View. So when they were said in the recent meeting that they were not sure if they'd approve that, I scratched my head because I haven't seen why there's a fundamental difference between what we're proposing and what they've already approved. But then they also, they and MTC and others have all also said we're in an exceptional period of time to have state and federal dollars for active transportation. And this was actually something that was even emphasized at US Conference of Mayors. Everybody said this is a moment in time where there are a couple of huge buckets of dollars. And so pursuing those for bike and ped crossings would be a priority, except we're nowhere along the way on design, and we aren't even there in terms of saying when we're going to start the design. Because as of right now, it would be considered as part of the bike and ped master plan and then begin that initial work. So that basically jeopardizes all those big dollars. And I realized in the last topic, when we were debating what goes to the council, this is perhaps one decision aspect that we need to, and it was on our list, is does council want to say we want to move forward with the design on this before commencing with the whole bike and ped, or at least preliminary, that we select locations, begin preliminary design, enough to get us teed up to be a candidate for funding. whether it's in parallel with the bike and ped plan or whatnot, but that's a decision of first for this rail committee to make a recommendation on, and then for the council to act on, because otherwise we basically throw in the towel for the next 2 years on these dollars.
So I'll try and take that. So I think there's a couple different issues. Noting that the bike and ped plan is intended to identify an integrated network for the bicycle and pedestrian network. So that's one of the reasons why you want that potentially together. The second part to that is we would need to do considerable community engagement and quite a lot of work in order to advance those projects, even if we knew how they connected to the network, such that we don't have the resources in the Office of Transportation currently to move forward with conceptual design of multiple new projects without stopping all of our other projects, including the bike and ped plan, but not just probably the bike and ped plan, other projects as well. So I just want to note that those are the challenges that we have in sequencing, because we already have more projects than we can work on queued up. And so we do have that, that issue that would arise if we were to determine. But I do think, this is where we get into some real nuances. And I will say that we're talking with VTA about, whether we can use the funding, if that Measure B funding would be available for these projects. I do anticipate that they will push back that we would need to, potentially demonstrate how these projects are necessary. And I'm just guessing, but it's very likely that they would push back on us, that we would need to demonstrate that these crossings are necessary, although they're not identified as mitigations, except for in one of the potential alternatives. And we've already said that we could provide crossings during construction for bicycle and pedestrians. So I do anticipate that will be their pushback on that. So I'm just presenting the challenges, and I don't necessarily have the answers there.
So first, on the issue of needing the new bike and ped plan to have this, we have on the one in the proximity of Loma Verde has been it's in the existing bike and ped plan. We haven't flushed it out, but it's not that it's not there. And we've kind of had this approach to it as if that doesn't exist, but it does. And then even subsequent to that period, we've gone through with the whole NV cap and recognize that we're going to have by necessity, a bike flow through that area. We had back in 2014, 15, we looked extensively at whether we could have on I'll call it the east side of Alma, going in the creek right away, and that got ruled out. And so the default then meant that we were going to pick a street. So it's not like that's completely a greenfield concept. And now in the south, we have a different question. And then we also have, as part of the Churchill mitigations, the necessity to separate and tentatively at Seal. And so that's a replacement for a current crossing at Churchill. So that's not the same as having it all flushed out, but those are still things that are not from ground zero either. And then I just had on the other issue of AECOM, the outreach was listed, and then it was stated, and meeting with the originators of these design alternatives, not to mention we had this group of local civils who were involved with XCAP. It seems that sequentially that needs to come first, and we need to be deliberate on that. And that's a thing that should just be lickety split.
Yeah, we concur with that, and
Okay,
that's
good.
in our intention.
Okay. Lastly, in the comments to high-speed rail, they're projecting what operating speed on the peninsula and in the San Jose to Gilroy. Do you recall?
You're talking about. I'm sorry, you're referring to in the EIR, the new
Yeah.
EIR. Yeah. So
110. Okay, so in operating in all those areas, they are intending in that EIR and the current business plan to proceed with that, and the number of grade separations that they would provide for as a result is 0. And I think that we should object to the EIR on that basis. I can't remember what comments we've had in the past, but I just don't understand how you could have a corridor with that many at-grade crossings and not have severe environmental and public safety impacts. I mean, it's hard to even imagine a 110-mile-an-hour train going through up and down the corridor, 60-something at-grade crossings. We've never had this.
So I just briefly speak to that, and testing my memory, but in 2020, we did at least include in our comment letter to them regarding their draft EIR that we were concerned about the speeds and the safety and well, several other things, pages and pages of comments, but that was one of the things that we did speak to.
Yeah,
And it'd be interesting to see their response. I'm sorry.
right, and I don't know what their response is, but the question is, in EIR process, we comment, they respond, and then it's okay. Now, what do we do? And what were their responses? And they might have technical responses, but they just don't pass any kind of a smell test. And so I really would encourage us to pose. Now, Caltrain in their business plan is intending to operate to what speed? Is it the 110 or is it the 79?
I believe it's 79.
Yeah. So similar argument really with Caltrain of, are they going to be able to operate 110 miles an hour on this corridor without grade separations too? And as much as we're supportive of Caltrain, I don't think we should go so far as to say that. And frankly, to what extent does that force MTC and the state to step up and address what is an obvious necessity, that you can't run 110-mile-an-hour trains frequently without grade separations? And there's no place in the country that is done. The Bright Line system in Florida that went in a few years ago, Nadia, I think you had shared, I don't know what speed they're at and how many fatalities have they had at a lower speed?
They've had a lot, but if I may, unfortunately, they are allowed to operate 110.
Legally.
Yes,
Yeah.
where they're not allowed to do it is if they add more tracks. So if they increase to 3 or 4 tracks, then CPUC rules say that they have to, by force, change it and make a grade separation.
So that would apply to the single track they have south of San Jose if they made it a 2 or 3 track.
Correct.
Or if they want a 4 track here, then just in those locations, they would have to.
Exactly.
Okay, well, that's
But
interesting.
Yeah. To add to that is there are 2 conditions. If the speed goes above 125, also that triggers. Yeah, that's why they want to stay.
What does it trigger, Ripon? If it,
Grade separation.
I see.
That's right, I forgot that.
Councilmember Cormack.
Thank you, Mr. Bhatia, for the update. I appreciate it. And, I think we're, continuing to go round and round about whether we want to move forward with, bicycle crossings near train crossings before the plan. And I think there's some different perspectives here. I mean, the council did consider this and we did agree the last time we took it up to hard as it is for all of us who are impatient to get going to wait for the full plan. I mean, if you use the hypothetical Loma Verde crossing as an example, part of the reason it's not there is that Loma Verde was pulled out of that portion of the bike plan. That was supposed to be done originally at the same time as Ross Road, but the objections meant that that was pulled out. So I think that's an example of why this integration is so important. And it's, it's really unfortunate that we don't have any shovel-ready projects that we can put forward for some of this federal funding. But time and again, if we do these things without thinking about them in an integrated, prioritized, and those are two different things, manner, we make mistakes. And I think we have learned that the prioritization is incredibly important. And I believe that, based on where these grade crossings are, train crossings, these will probably have a decent priority. But the council has made that decision. I think, Mr. Cami is, two rail committees now in a row explained why is not his recommendation that we advance these, potential bike crossings before we complete the full plan.
It was a year and a quarter ago, April, that the council took that up, and two things have changed since then. One is the timeline for completion of the bike and ped master plan has been pushed out, right? And I think we were at that time, we're all expecting it was going to be sooner than we now expect. And then second, the funding opportunities have emerged. So we could just stick and say, well, when there were different conditions, we decided X and we won't reconsider it. But I would propose, and I am game to put in a motion, that we place a recommendation to the council. And the question then is, do we do this as a separate item to the council? We had, outside of this issue, we had said, we're good with it going to consent. Now, how would we bring this to the council without it, or with this, if we wanted to have this reconsidered and even a direction? So one's a reconsideration, the other's a recommendation on what we actually would say we want to do. How do we bring that up if this whole item is going to be on consent?
Well, I don't think we're even agendized to have that discussion today. This is a verbal update.
Well, there's it's actually part of the work plan, right? And
So
question,
apologies, the item that we're on now is verbal update on interagency activities, and this is updates from staff.
okay, well then we can go and reconsider the first item if need be. We can have an agenda change, right? We want to reopen an item that we concluded. You know, a motion to reconsider.
So if my suggestion for this body is that if they would like to have the council reconsider whether to, pursue certain bike, grade crossings, right? They would like to pursue certain grade crossings ahead of finishing the bike and pedestrian plan. That's something that this body should agendize for discussion, so that this body could then make a recommendation for council's discussion and potentially approve or not. I think, and that's not agendized for today. So as Mr. Cami has been kind of alluding to, it would be a topic for another day to discuss and make a recommendation.
So under attachment B of the work plan, it says advance the planning and selection of new east-west bike ped plan stuff.
And again, back on, I'm sorry, we're being informal. Is that all right, Chair Koo?
Right, I was kind of thinking about that, but also I want to make sure that we go to the public for comments. So if you want to move forward with this discussion further, maybe finish it or maybe hold off until we hear from the general public too.
I'm looking at the second italicized sentence on packet page 3. which is if we want to discuss these specific plans, they need to be agendized for a future meeting. So it seems straightforward. I'm on
Packet page
page
3.
3. So this was what we already considered, and this was the appropriate direction, because we were just reviewing the work plan, not the topics within it in detail. So
A question, did you guys decide to put the work plan to consent or the guiding principles to consent, or both?
Both.
Okay, well, I'll be game to then bring it up at our next real committee meeting, presumably in August. Let's get it agendized then.
Okay, so going back to item number, the current item updates. Let me go to the public. Is there any public? We have 2.
Okay, Adrian Brandt, if you'd like to make your comments, you have up to 3 minutes to make your comments on this item.
Thank you. I just wanted to chime in on the discussion around train speeds that was just occurring. 110 miles an hour is 31 miles an hour faster than Caltrain already travels. And actually all railroads that have the same kind of signaling system as Caltrain travel today. The high death rate or incident rate on Florida's Bright Line, very well documented. I've been watching that, and that is a cultural problem in that area. They have not had the public down there is not familiar with trains running on that line. It was all freight, and the Bright Line is relatively new. And all of those incidents, every single one, was the result of either somebody inebriated, racing the train, etc. And they do not have quad gates down there. Neither do we, except for at Atherton. It's the only crossing that does so far. And but the High Speed Rail Authority is proposing for the peninsula. I'm on the community working group, so I get some staff presentations on this. But they're proposing to do quad gates at all the grade crossings, the remaining at grade crossings. And that precludes anyone from trying to drive around against the flow of traffic and bypass the gates. I'll hasten to add that on the Caltrain line, because of, I think everybody just knows about our trains, we actually do not have that problem. But nevertheless, that's what they're proposing to do. And by not having that problem, I mean all the crashes on Caltrain going back for the decades that I've been paying very close attention. There's none that I can recall, except for maybe a bicycle that rode around the gate with their car and got hit. So the 31 miles an hour faster, so the 110, the only difference from a crossing user's perspective would be the speed at which the train goes through the crossing. The gates would come down with the same amount of warning time, because that's scaled to the train speed. So there's really no effective difference whether the train goes 50 miles an hour or 110 miles an hour. Every one of those speeds is completely fatal. So it doesn't really matter from a practical perspective whether the train is going 110 or 79. If you're going to get hit, it's going to be fatal. And you can't be any deader than dead. So I'm not sure that it makes a ton of sense to fight the battle over asking for requiring grade steps, because they don't want to spend the money or have the money. So that's where they're going with that. The only difference, again, in the higher speed would be a higher impact force. And as I said, it's already fatal. So, it's kind of, from my perspective, an academic point of how much deader can you be? So unfortunately, that's the grim reality. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for your comments. The next speaker is Nadia Nayak.
So I just wanted to point out that High Speed Rail has a history of dumping the EIRs in the summer on the city of Palo Alto. And we have each time requested for an extension with the understanding that staff is away in the summer and it's unfair to respond to such an enormous document during this time period. So I would say that we should get with other cities and sort of make that similar request. It's what we did before with our allies. Second is, and I don't know enough about EIRs, but I believe this is supposed to be their final EIR. So in this EIR, their answers to our previous complaints should be in the back of the giant document, which I was hoping to come visit because I believe the real copy lives here at the city, because that's what I do for fun. And so that is where you guys should look to see what High Speed Rail has said previously. I was interested to hear what Adrian Brandt said, that High Speed Rail is now saying that they're going to do quad gates the entire length of the peninsula. The reason that's interesting is because quad gates are one of the requirements for quiet zones. So I think one of the things we ought to be asking our elected officials in Sacramento right now who are doing budget negotiations is if they're going to give money to the endpoints and not necessarily continue with all high-speed rail activities, some of the continued improvements they could do is pay for the quad gates now, and that would be something that kind of helps all the cities. So we might think about advocating for that. I would also suggest that we use the city's rail list and pan list to let them know that the high-speed rail EIR has come out. Previously, this community's been super engaged, and you might actually get lots of good comments from members of the community. And so I would push that out as much as we could. I've, in talking about the bike projects, I did want to point out or make a correction. The Loma Verde project was actually pulled out because it was supposed to be part of the NVCAP. So there was, when we were deciding about the original community advisory panel, but before the expanded community advisory panel, there was a question about whether this should be addressed. And the recommendation was made that it should be part of NVCAP's discussion. And that's how it got pulled out and put into that. It was not my understanding that it was related to the Ross Road things, although I think the timing was somewhat similar. The other thing is, I recall from the meeting that part of the reason that the bicycle pedestrian grade crossing issue was taken out or was considered to be part of the bike plan was also because the certain council members were not thrilled with AECOM's work on considering bike ped design. And the city has previously used different consultants to work on bike ped projects. And so the rationale was, well, we don't really want to give AECOM more bike ped work, then therefore we should give it to bike ped consultants, and that's a different group. So I just want to add that color to the conversation. Thanks.
That's the last request to speak. Chair.
Thank you. Okay, back to the committee. If there's anything else, I think, I'm sorry. Nothing. Okay, I just want to make sure, the suggestion about pushing out regarding the HSR final EIR, that if there's a way to make sure that we communicate that to the community so that they are up and aware of all of this. So if there's nothing else, then we can close this agenda item. Okay. Last one is future agendas, next steps and future agendas. Committee.
So I'd like to include the discussion on the prioritization of the bike and ped crossings as they relate to grade separation. I'm not thinking of other agenda items right now, but there may be some that occur to me.
Councilmember Cormack, no. You are having a meeting today about the San Francisco Creek. I'd love to have that on the agenda at some point, for an update to us. Did I get it wrong?
Yeah, it's later in the week. But
Later in the week, yeah. So if that could be something that can be added to the agenda for us to kind of hear what their study.
I think Ripon earlier referred to a few updates are likely. We hopefully have a response to our letter to Caltrain. Maybe we even want to invite them to talk through that And then a VTA response on Measure B latitude for bike and ped crossings.
Sure.
And if I could just clarify with these, is the committee intending these to be something different than the kind of the usual staff update with the committee?
I think
Or
those three can be under the update, but just to
Great.
be clear on,
that
at
the
least
committee's expecting
not
these?
limited to those, but.
Great. Thank you for that clarification.
Okay. If there's nothing else, I just want to apologize to Councilmember Cormac about the time. And so if we can just make sure for future meetings that it starts, for future rail committee meetings, that it starts at 1:30.
No, it was just this one day that was
Oh,
the
it's just
problem.
this one day. I apologize.
It's all right.
Okay,
Shall we get
so-
our calendar out and pick the date for August?
Right.
Okay.
And so it's okay to just go back to 1 o'clock as the, okay. So is it
Alright.
usually that we have it on the second Wednesday, or is that just my
I thought it was the
imagination?
third,
It's the third.
but I
okay.
think, did we move it to the second because this was, oh no, it's the
Third.
second
It
Wednesday
is the
usually?
third,
It's the third, I'm
All
sorry.
right.
August
Cal-
So
17th.
August 17th. Yeah, we'll just need to end on time because I think we may have another meeting at 5 that we're holding time for.
Well, and just one note for folks, if I remember correctly from what Mr. Cami said, that the responses are due by August 17th, I think, in regards to the EIR. So if the committee wanted to have any discussion over that prior to the due date, I would recommend you consider a date before August 17th.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and we hadn't talked about that in the tentative agenda either.
Mhm.
Yeah, I cannot do the afternoon of the 10th. I have Bosca board policy at 1:30. And we also have a council meeting that night, it looks like.
On the 10th?
That's what I've got.
Oh, I don't have that down.
And
Are there two of them?
are we still holding time on the 17th as well? Those are the two.
No, it's the 10th and I believe the 3rd.
Okay, so I can release the 17th. Huh?
You can release the 17th.
Okay. Sure, everyone's just
Oh.
enjoying our
Good.
time here.
We get the 30th.
So does the 9th?
I just want to make sure I have the 30th. I do. Okay, so where are we? August 9th?
Mm-hmm. Deviate from the Wednesday.
You still thinking 1 o'clock?
If that's, yeah. Well,
Yeah,
mhm.
that's fine. We have policy and services at 7.
So you said the 9th?
Mhm.
Okay.
I could do the 9th at 1.
Okay.
1 to 4.
That's okay.
1, 2.
Okay.
1, 2, 4.
And clerk and other staff would be able to make that date work.
Yes, we'll.
Okay, Tuesday, August 9th at 1 PM.
Mhm.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, if there's nothing else, meeting's adjourned.
Okay.
3:07.